Your career is dependent on one person's opinion of you. It wasn't that I was passionate about ballet. I hardly ever got to see my parents. We were working 3 floors underground.
No daylight?
No daylight. No daylight.
Initially, you didn't really have a choice. How did you learn to love this art form?
Where to start with that question?
Welcome to So It Goes, the podcast where we explore how great things grow from small beginnings.
Alexander Jones, you've devoted your life to an art form that pushes the boundaries of human ability, one that requires extraordinary talent, relentless discipline, and the kind of mental and physical strength few can fathom. As a principal dancer, you've risen to the pinnacle of what is often described as one of the most grueling and unforgiving professions, ballet. What drew you into this world?
Where to start with that question? What drew me into the world? I don't think it was intentional whatsoever. I think for a lot of boys in ballet, not always, but in my case, definitely, and in a lot of cases, there's a sister story. So my sister started dancing years before I did. I was always encouraged to do a lot of different sports by my mum in particular, and pushed to do a lot of sports. And I think the dance came in because my sister was starting to be bullied in the local dance school. And they asked me if I would take her in. I think not just from the car, but also into the studio. I think they found her one day crying in the bathroom and she hadn't managed to get herself into the studio. So Big Brother went into the studio with her. And from what I know, because I really don't remember actually, the first class I did was a tap class. And like any little boy that enters into, it was on musical theatre school more than a ballet school, but they did everything. I quickly joined, the acting and singing class and then the modern class, and ballet was the last thing that I did. And I did ask my mum. Apparently she told me that my answer was, just so long as I don't have to wear a tutu, I'm okay with doing ballet. I don't remember that, but she told me that I said that. So, which seems like quite a funny thing to say already at that age for a little boy. But I think I wasn't that young. Probably I was towards the end of 9 years old, because shortly after starting ballet, I think I'd been doing it about 6 months. The ballet teacher wanted to take me to a dance festival in London. And there was another little boy there that was going to the Royal Ballet School, Jack Jones, same surname. And I happened to do well in, I think it was the London Ballet Festival Awards. And his mum came to my ballet teacher and mum and said, is your son also going to the Royal Ballet School, And my mum had no idea what the Royal Ballet School was, but my teacher obviously knew and had been to the Royal Ballet School herself. So, yeah, we were very lucky that Jack Jones's mum was there and kind of gave us a telephone number and said, you should really call the school. And we did, and we explained what had happened at the ballet festival. And they said, well, you better bring him up right away. And it was all really by chance. And I think for my parents, the fact that things worked out this way, for them, really, they were not in a very good financial situation at the time. In the early 90s, let's say, my dad went completely bankrupt. They lost all their assets. And I think for them, they just thought, when I got offered a place at the school, they just thought, look, whether he comes out as a dancer or not, at least from 11 to 16, he's going to be in a privileged environment, small classes, good education. And then at 16 years old, he can go on to a good college or whatever else he wants to do, right? But lo and behold, I did the full 8 years at the Royal Ballet School, 5 years at the lower school in Surrey, in Richmond Park, which is, it's a leased school it's leased by the royal family to the Royal Ballet School. It's a wonderful place, but after 5 years in there, in a boarding school, you feel like you're getting out of prison at the end of it. And then I did 3 years in the upper school in Covent Garden before joining my first ballet company. And I really struggled. First 2 years, I really struggled. Pretty much every other day, I would have a little bit of a shutdown, internal shutdown, where I would turn away, face the bar, put my little blue towel on the bar, put my head down on the table, on the bar. And when that would happen, it was like, okay, that's it. You're not going to get anything more from me today within this training, you know? And then when the class was over, I'd leave the training, I'd have academics, and I'd go to academics and I'd get on with my day like nothing had happened. But I think there was this sense of not feeling good enough to be there. One of my friends, I mean, we're all today, all those people I went to school with are like brothers to me. They're my family. They know me as well, if not better than my own family. And we're all very honest with each other. And one of my friends said to me, "You were definitely the worst in the class." And the nice thing is, I mean, there was a lot of sacrifice and there was a lot of struggle. But in the end, I came out towards the top of the class and went on to have a wonderful career. But I think it really forced me to be confronted with a lot of family things, shame things, with my parents' financial situation. My dad had committed fraud to try and save our home, and I'd gone to prison for a couple of years just before I'd gone to the Royal Ballet School, which was something I could, for a long time, not share with any of my friends. So there was a lot of things going on underneath during that time of training, and I hardly ever got to see my parents. And I don't want to make it sound like it's a sad story, because it's really not. You know, I was definitely better in the school environment than I was at home. But when you're 11-year-old kid, you don't know that, right? I mean, there's still this sense of abandonment and being sent to a school just to get on with things. And my parents just thought, okay, that's one child taken care of in a way. And they had 3 more kids at home. So there wasn't a choice in it. At the same time, at 11 years old, I don't think any child really knows what they want to do, right? Of course, we can show an interest in a certain thing and then the parents allow us to go into that direction. But I think in my case, it wasn't that I was passionate about ballet. I became passionate, let's say obsessive about ballet.
How did you learn to love this art form when initially you didn't really have a choice? And you mentioned that sometimes you were completely shut down.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's like anything, that when you start to get good at something and you see your personal improvement in something, then, you know, it can be anything. You like, if you feel yourself getting better, you start to enjoy it, right? And that's why it's so important to start somewhere. For anyone out there that wants to learn something, the chances are in the beginning it's going to be very frustrating and it's going to be very monotonous and it's going to take a lot of patience. But I think, you know, if you can manage to apply yourself for a year, say 2 years probably, to something, and you start to see the improvements and the benefits, that's when we can start to enjoy it. So definitely, I think the change for me was maybe in my second year at the school, and I saw grades improving, and we were often taken to the Royal Ballet, and we got to see performances. So if I would see a dancer like, for example, Carlos Acosta, Cuban dancer, one of the most famous dancers of our generation, and I think every male dancer looks up to him as, you know, an example of really a wonderful, virtuoso, fabulous, charismatic dancer. And when you see those sorts of people on stage and you realize the athleticism involved, I think for me, it was very much about the athletic side for a long time. And the artistry definitely came later. But maybe there was the artistry always there underlying because of the struggle, right? And not just, like I say, the struggle with the training itself, but the family background and the struggle of my upbringing, my mum's childhood in particular. Being an athlete, she was at 16 offered to play netball for England, and at the time, sports world was not recognised as any sort of occupation or job. You couldn't earn money being a netball player. So her parents didn't allow her to go and insisted that she stayed in school, which was a non-starter for my mum. She would always, miss school, play tennis, I don't know, do all of the sporting activities she would want to do. So she didn't get to live that dream for herself. So I think that's why she pushed me so much to do many sports, and somewhat wanted to live her dream maybe through me, which also was a lot of pressure.
So you joined the Royal Ballet School not really knowing if you were going to end up dancing professionally, but then you obviously did. How is one prepared for a ballet career? What is the training like?
I think every day there's a good 4 hours of dance training. I seem to remember classes where ballet class would happen every day, 6 days a week. And it depended on when your academics were. So in the first year, I think ballet class was at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. And it might have even been 2 hours, possibly. 2 hours, an hour and 45 minutes. Especially when we were younger, it was definitely longer. And then you would have academics in between for 2 hours, lunch break, academics again. And then later in the afternoon, you'd have, in the Royal Ballet School, they integrated things like Scottish, Irish. Morris dancing was actually in the first year. So Morris dancing is a very traditional English form of dancing where you have handkerchiefs and kind of these metal sword things, and you create shapes with the handkerchiefs or with the swords. And it's a very old school type of dancing. And then in the later years, you have tap dance and contemporary dance, different types of contemporary dance integrated into the training as well. Martha Graham, Cunningham technique. Yeah. But really most of I think time for yourself during the day, you really have maybe lunchtime, which is 1 hour. And then you have in between, say, 6 o'clock and 8:15, you would have dinner, but you'd also have time to maybe go and play a bit of football or, I don't know, to mess around in the dormitories. And then at 8:15 till 9:15, or was it 7:15 till 8:15? I don't remember, but a long time ago now, we would even have homework hour. Like it was like an hour to do our homework where we go back to the classrooms and do, I think it was called prep time for the next day. So most of your day is filled with ballet training and academics. There's very little time for you to be a kid, for you to be a child.
How do you even find a job as a dancer? What happens once you graduate?
In my graduating year, I was very fortunate to be offered many jobs with different companies. I think I could have potentially gone to 7 different companies. But the one job I didn't get was the Royal Ballet. And pretty much from 16 until 18, the school ended at 19, I assumed, because the teachers kind of indicated, that I was on the path for going to the Royal Ballet.
In London?
In London, yeah. And for whatever reason, I didn't get offered a job. And then you have to go around and you have to audition at other companies. And for me, I always knew I didn't want to stay in England if it wasn't the Royal Ballet. I didn't want to go to English National Ballet. I didn't want to go to Birmingham Royal Ballet. I wanted to have my experience somewhere else in the world. It could have been the States, and it turned out to be Europe. So I did quite a few auditions, but I was also offered jobs just by being put up front in performances. And Stuttgart Ballet was really my decision because when I sat down with the director after the audition, he said, I can see you being, I think he really said, I can see you being a principal dancer of this company. You're tall, you're a good partner. And that was an easy enough decision for me. You know, if a director sits opposite me and tells me, I don't know when, I don't know how fast, but I can see you being a principal dancer of this company. Decision made. Honestly, yeah, I'm forever grateful to him because I wasn't the easiest to work with. Again, it comes back to that thing of feeling good enough, accepting yourself, accepting what you see, like your qualities, like being able to appreciate what you have and not being too hard on yourself about the things that you don't have. These internal shutdowns that I spoke about that would happen in my first few years in school, and then I would say in the third, fourth year, because of the support of a particular teacher, at least the rate that they would happen definitely changed, and they wouldn't happen in the same form. But what did happen was it certainly in my early professional career, it came out in a different way. And when I felt that I wasn't good enough or wasn't able to do a particular jump that day because maybe I was just tired, or maybe I was being hard on myself, it would come out in a more, only ever towards myself, but in a more physical way. And I would maybe be like hitting down on the bar, or like hitting myself like, I can't do it. One ballet master in particular, today we should call them rehearsal directors. A rehearsal director is somebody that works with you on the choreography to tell us what looks good, what can be better. And again, it was the support of somebody really sticking with me and allowing me to have those sort of emotional outbursts, actually. And that's also something which for many years, I would observe different rehearsal directors, and some were really good at giving functional, constructive feedback, and others were terrible at it. And you would really see the difference in dancers, how they would perform and how they would work with a ballet master, depending on how good the ballet master was at giving feedback. And sometimes a ballet master would give feedback in very brutal, critical, dysfunctional ways.
Do you have an example?
I won't give a particular example, but it's the attitude that it's done with. And I would see it sometimes with younger dancers, and I would feel myself watching it and being emotionally pulled in and thinking, do they know like how that might affect that person today and for the rest of the day and for the rest of the week and maybe even throughout their career? And it's such a fine line, because the ballet master has the rehearsal director has such a responsibility for sometimes 40 people in the room to make sure everyone's doing the steps right. And if they feel for one moment, that it's third, fourth, fifth, or they've been doing multiple rehearsals and that person isn't falling in line, because in some cases it really is like being very regimented, and it is like being in some sort of military environment or something. So yeah, everybody needs to do their part. And sometimes the rehearsal director would have a good point, and other times it would just be that they're overtired, they're stressed, they're frustrated, they have too much work, and one dancer just gets the wrong end of the stick. They get the bad moment, and it can affect them.
If we take a step back, if you had to give a job description, ballet dancer, what would it say in that job description? What does your day-to-day life look like? What is your job? What do you have to do?
Of course, there is, the ability, first of all, to be able to do just all the steps, all the terminology, all the different things, all the requirements. Like, there's that, right? And that alone takes so many years of dedication, because you're shaping your body in a way which it's not naturally born and shaped to do. And there is a healthy way to do it, but that takes time and you need to do it slowly. And over the years, you can slowly change maybe the shapes of the hips and so there's that side of it. There's the physical side of it. And then there is the mental side of it from the point of view of dedication, commitment, sacrifice, struggle, all of those things. But there's also the mental side of it of how good are you at managing people? Like, how good are you at maintaining friendships, at getting the support you need from the people around you? And if you're not good at that, it can be an extremely lonely career, especially as a principal dancer or a soloist dancer. And I would say even as a corps de ballet dancer, if you don't find it easy to maintain relationships, and if you aren't able to be good with yourself so that you can be good with others, it's a really hard career. I think I was always very, very fortunate to have a really good support system around me. Before we started, I spoke about being in a relationship with an Italian girl, Alessandra Tognaloni. She's now principal dancer in Monte Carlo. I mean, she was, without her, throughout the first 10 years of my career, I think I wouldn't have eaten well. I wouldn't have had a clean home. I wouldn't have done the Hoover. No, I'm exaggerating, but really she was a wonderful, wonderful support for me, and also psychologically to be able to, she believed in me more than I believed in myself. And then I would say in the second part of my career, probably about 7 years in, I really started to be able to see myself after a performance and take the good things from it. And I started to let go of things like maybe not having the most aesthetically pleasing feet, and take my eyes away from that and see that I had something else to give from the point of view of the energy or the light on stage or the acting abilities and the artistic abilities, and to really immerse myself into a story, whether it was being in love or whether it was being rejected or killing someone on stage, to not care about looking good, but to actually really, put everything into the role, which is really ideally what we should be able to do. And sometimes the focus goes too much onto the form, which anyway happens in your first 8 years of training. And ideally, of course, there's always work to be done, and that you never achieve the perfect aesthetic and form. But hopefully at one point within your career, you can let go of that perfectionism and really just focus on enjoying the roles and the artistic side of things. Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning that as a dancer, you have a very particular challenge, which is you're essentially doing a sport, but unlike other sports, you have to make it look effortless. So you might be dying inside, but to the audience, you still have to look like it's the easiest thing.
Yeah.
How did you manage that?
So just to touch on that, like, yes, from the point of view of the work and the energy we put in and the dedication to the body and the athleticism, it is like a sport, but different from a sport. And I think I struggled with this. Like, there is no number one, right? And that's something where, like, you can't, it's not something you can win. It's very much about, like, an audience can come and watch 2 different shows and they can prefer one dancer over another dancer. And really 2 different people can say, I thought that was an amazing show, and the other one will say that, and then they see the other person and they don't like the show at all, right? So it's really a matter of opinion. And this is what makes it so hard, because often directors choose their preferred dancers and it's really just their opinion. So your career is dependent on one person's opinion of you. And of course, not everybody can be a soloist or principal dancer, but there were so many dancers that technically or artistically, I guess, let's focus more technically, were so much more capable than I was. And certainly today, I mean, the competitive ballet, like the competition in the ballet world now, it's so high. Maybe if I was coming into the ballet world today, I never would achieve it, or I wouldn't get to that principal position. I'd like to think I would, but because again, there is the artistic side, which in the end I think should override all. But you can't do. I think there's so many factors. You can't do one thing without the other thing. You need the package. You need the full package. So you need to be a good artist. You need to be technically capable up until a certain point. You need to have maybe the height. You might need to also, be a good partner. There's so many factors involved to become even a ballet dancer at all. And then to be a soloist dancer or to be a principal dancer, very few people come with everything. And I think that's really, really difficult to find.
Most people, I imagine, know that a ballet dancer spends a lot of time on stage. What does a work week look like, though? How do you prepare for those performances? How many hours a day do you spend preparing for those shows?
Often people think, they come and see a ballet, and certainly if it's a more traditional ballet, a classical ballet, they think that it's all happy, smiling, people being lifted, having a good time, dancing around. And of course, when we're on stage and we need to smile and we need to perform, the endorphins and things which are released give that impression. And it is maybe not for everybody, because if you're doing it for year after year after year, you get so used to repeating certain repertoire and you start to see the faces on stage which have done it 100 times and they're actually a bit bored out, right? And that's when you get a glimpse into what is life behind the stage. If you, as an audience member, are aware of it and you see that maybe one or two people which aren't really in the moment on stage and have got to that point in their career where they're a bit bored out. So what goes on behind the stage? Rehearsals, lots of rehearsals, rehearsal after rehearsal after rehearsal. So London was until 19 years old. Moved to Stuttgart, Germany, 19 till 29, 10 years there. And then 2015, August, I came to Zurich and I spent 7.5 years with the company. We were working 3 floors underground.
Underground meaning no daylights?
No daylights. No daylights. So a day starts with training in the morning, which is, the idea is to warm you up for the day. Training doesn't have to be about pushing yourself. It doesn't have to be about, it's not like training every day in the gym. It can just be about warming up your body and doing what you need for the day. And then we would have a 15-minute break, which is very short when you have to go up 3 floors, change, have something to eat, come down 3 floors and then go straight in the studio. You really don't have much time for yourself. You know, if you were working the whole day in the theatre, apart from the lunchtime, you wouldn't really have time for daylight. So for me, I always went out at lunchtime. I think it was very rare that I would eat in the canteen in the Opera House. And that was really, even if it was a grey day, that was really just to get outdoors, have some fresh air, change, put on some normal clothes at some point in the day, feel like a normal person for, 45 minutes and then go back in the studio. And to be honest, this cannot be healthy for anyone.
On top of all of that, you're in ballet studios that are basically, the walls are covered with mirrors, right?
Yeah.
So
at least on 2 sides, yeah.
You're observing yourself a lot. What does that do to you mentally when you're pursuing perfection and you're observing yourself all day? Did that affect you in any way?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, it did. I think the best thing you can do is as quickly as possible learn to not look in the mirror and to trust the rehearsal director that's in front of you. I think that's, as a dancer, that's really important to learn that early on. But when you're having those days where you just, maybe things aren't working or you feel a bit insecure about yourself, it's very hard to do that. And you go back to the mirror and that just makes it worse. If you don't like yourself before you enter in the ballet studio, if you are carrying, maybe childhood issues about yourself or educational trauma, it's very hard if those things aren't addressed. And this is something that I think is really interesting, because actually I'm so grateful for ballet, speaking of mirrors, for holding up a mirror for me. Because I think if it wasn't for being immersed into this world of high discipline and, perfectionism, wanting to be perfect, where really, it's never achievable, I wouldn't have been confronted with myself as often as I was. And there were so many opportunities. I see all those moments where I would shut down and not feel good enough were opportunities for me to look at. It wasn't about the ballet. It was about something else, something deeper. And to learn to overcome that. I mean, I think so many people go through life not having this mirror where they have to be confronted with themselves. I would imagine not many jobs do that for you and really show you to yourself. So yeah, I could say it's about the ballet, but really it was something deeper than that, and about accepting myself and where I came from. Yeah, not feeling good enough, all of these things. And it would have been, if it was in another discipline, it would have shown up there as well. Ballet, it's something that you have to apply yourself to at such an early age, 11 years old, every day. And at that point, you have no idea what other things you're going to have to work through as an adult. What other things from your parenting that you're going to need to address. So you're doing that at the same time as maintaining or trying to succeed in this very high demand, highly stressful, vulnerable industry, or where you're very vulnerable in this industry. At 19 years old, we're still not fully developed. Like, our prefrontal cortex is still developing until 25 years old, or certainly in guys, I think it's a bit earlier in women. So yeah, there's a lot happening, in those early years. And 25, I became principal dancer at 25, 26, right? But those years between 19 to 26, I mean, I'd have a good show and I'd have a show where I was like, that was the worst show in the world because one pirouette didn't happen, right? Yeah, it was a very, I had a lot of ups and downs with myself to be able to accept the package that I had as a dancer.
And so you start so young, also with your career, 25, principal dancer. At the same time...
25, 26, I think.
25, 26.
Yeah.
At the same time, you can't dance forever. But you're all in to the dance career. So how can you prepare for what's next after dance?
I like this question. I like this question a lot because I think it's not spoken about enough in the dance community. Pretty much after maybe a year of being a principal, I was already thinking, like, if I stay here in Stuttgart forever, what am I going to do here? It's a German-speaking country. It's not a very international city, not many expats. I certainly couldn't do a job here in English. I don't want to end up being a rehearsal director. I don't want to be a choreographer. So I stayed another 3-4 years as a principal dancer in Stuttgart. And then I would say, we would do 120 shows a year. Maybe I was also everything revolved around ballet, right? It was, the theatre was is like a second home. You go on tour with the company. You have no friends outside of the theatre, and it's not. I don't say that it's like that everywhere, but it was like that for me in Stuttgart. So my whole world was about the theatre, and I only socialised with people in the theatre. So when I left at 29 years old, I really consciously looked for a place where I could see myself being allowed to continue my mastery as a performer, but also in a place where I would have a higher standard of living. So Switzerland, higher salaries, and then also potentially see myself in a city where I could transition into something else, whatever that might be. I had no idea at the time, but whatever that might be. So because of that, I made the choice more on standard of living and the transitioning, what I would do afterwards, rather than going to another big classical company and furthering my career. And I would say it was a bit too early to do that at 29 years old. But this is where dancers are lacking the guidance, right? And I think we could do better in the dance world to start advising dancers earlier as to ways they can open up their worlds, develop different communities outside of just the theatre. But I think for a lot of dancers, it's really something that's present in their mind throughout their career. It certainly gave me a lot of anxiety.
How old were you when you had to retire?
Okay, so I didn't have to retire. We had a change of director, and I was let go by Kathy Marston, the now current director, and for good reason, because I knew, and she knew, that at least in this theatre, I was already out the door, to say. I was still performing very well, and physically my body was intact. Like, I was very fortunate to not have any serious injuries throughout my career. So we had a conversation, and I think also this is quite normal and typical when a house has a director that is also a choreographer, obviously. And I struggle with this because my first director was just a director, and he wasn't a choreographer. And so, of course, he could influence decisions maybe of choreographers coming in and casting for their pieces. But I think in most cases, he would try to let the choreographer decide who they wanted in their piece and not push.
This was in Stuttgart?
This was in Stuttgart. And I think when a house has a director as a choreographer, it makes it difficult to separate the two roles. Because obviously a choreographer wants to have dancers in the company that they know well, that they can work with, that suit their particular type of choreography, right? But just because a dancer doesn't suit one type of choreography doesn't mean they're not a good dancer, but they would be less used or even let go just because they haven't worked with this one type of choreographer. So I think it's a risky thing to mix the two roles as a director and a choreographer, because they're two very different things. And to direct a company is really one thing, and then to come and choreograph on a company is something else. So of course, when a director comes in as a choreographer, they like to bring dancers with them that they know how they work and they know how the choreographer works. And even then, sometimes it's still a gamble and it goes wrong. And dancers stay 1 year and then they go back to their previous companies, or they can't go back to their previous companies, but they can't stay where they are because it hasn't worked out with the new director choreographer. And I think in some companies, there's some sort of, rules and regulations, or a union which cannot allow these things to happen. But yeah, in this case, it happened for me. in some way, I agree, because I don't believe in holding on. And I think it's always good to let go. If something wants to go, or if, then let it go, you know? So I didn't really try to fight for my position there. And I also knew within myself, I knew what I wanted to do. So it was kind of easy for me as well. It was an easy decision. But I probably would have stayed and danced a couple more years.
If
Now,
you could have.
If I could have, yes. Yeah. Because I really, at this point, you started the whole podcast with a very grueling and demanding career. And it is. But I think when you get to sort of your mid-30s and onwards, you get to a point of acceptance, and you get to a point of just being able to really enjoy being on stage. And that's the part that's important, right? It's the studio work. Actually, I wouldn't say it became easy, but when you're doing it from 11 years old, training isn't hard anymore. It's almost like, it's like your daily medicine. You go to the bar, you do your pliés, and your body becomes supple, and you just get into the flow, and it's like, it's flow. Like, and it's still hard, and sometimes you do have to think, and sometimes you have days again when you get frustrated with yourself, but you know you don't have to be frustrated with yourself anymore, right? Because it's not that you can't do something. Maybe it's just how early you got into the work that day and your frame of mind. So you really learn to accept yourself, and you work out a formula for yourself as to what works. And so going on stage can really be, at that point, it's really enjoyable, you know? Yeah. And it's such a short career, and there's not much time to be able to enjoy actually that phase where I would say it kind of became easy. And I could rely on my spontaneity. And I loved that, because I would rather have that than have any 1-2 shows being the same, you know, and seeing what comes out in the moment. Now, of course, when you're a younger artist, you want to rehearse each moment to the finest detail. And then, of course, it's still going to be different on stage. But when it is different on stage, you might freak out about the fact that it's different on stage. But if you leave things open for freedom and for spontaneity in the studio, and then when it comes on stage, you are ready for that, because every show's live, right? No 2 shows are ever the same. So I think, it's really interesting to see the development within yourself as you go through your career.
Take me back to your last bow. What was going through your head? You hear the audience clapping. You know, this for now is your final show.
Yeah, interesting. Good moment to bring up, because I think for me, I really felt happy and excited, and I didn't feel sad. And I think that's for many reasons. I think I'm so grateful, and I got to dance, and like, I couldn't have imagined, you know, even at graduating from the Royal Ballet School and knowing, like, yeah, let's not talk about 11 years old when I really didn't feel good enough and shouldn't have been in that environment that I was. Let's even talk about at the end of the Royal Ballet School, when all the training, the work training had happened, and, you know, I graduated as one of the top 2 people in my class. And, you know, even at that point, if you told me I was going to have the career that I've had, I should have believed it, but I wouldn't have believed it, right? You know, I pretty much got to dance nearly everything. There's like 2 or 3 ballets that I have on one hand that I can count that I would have liked to have done, but just weren't in the repertoire of the companies that I was in. And that's really it, you know? And I already had in mind what it was that I wanted to do next, you know? In the end, again, everybody's replaceable. And that is a very difficult side about the career. There is always someone waiting to go on stage that's happy for the opportunity, somebody younger, not necessarily better, but will grow, and develop themselves as an artist and bring something new to the stage. So, yeah, I think when it's time and you really know it. And for me, I really knew it.
I feel like we could keep talking for hours and hours and we would still have so much more to talk about. But perhaps I will ask 2 last questions.
Let's go.
The first one being, for people who don't know anything about ballet, when you've met these people and you had to introduce yourself and tell them what you do, what have been some of the most common misconceptions that they had about this career?
A lot of people still think that guys wear point shoes. And guys do wear point shoes, right? But it tends to be more in the... there's a company called Ballet de Trocadero where it's an all-guy company and there's the prince as the guy and the female role as the guy as well, and they'll wear tutus and point shoes. But that's more... It can be... And it can also happen in other environments as well. But in the traditional setting, guys don't wear point shoes. Their role is more to partner the girl in her point shoes, lift, and then they might do the more virtuoso work. Or, everybody jumps, everybody turns, But yeah, traditionally, guys do not wear point shoes, and I'm always surprised that people still think that guys might wear point shoes or toe shoes, they call them in the States. Misconceptions. What other misconceptions? That everybody might have an eating disorder. I'm always defending that side of things. And yes, there are cases where the environment brings out eating disorder tendencies, but it's not because of the career. The career is just the trigger, right? And I work at a clinic now these days on an assignment basis, and I recently actually had a client with a severe eating disorder, and I won't talk about it much more than that. But this person was also in a very highly disciplined and exposing industry. It was an art form. It was more athletic, ice skating, and yeah, it's not the industry itself which brings out these sides to people. It can be parenting, codependency. I don't know. It could also be genetic. The science behind eating disorders is not really clear as to where and why it happens. But as a ballet dancer, you need so much energy. You need to eat healthily. A lot of us do smoke and drink and use even recreational drugs. And that is part of the escapism as well, that an artist can afford themselves, which is different to an athlete. I don't know if it will always be like that. Hopefully it will, because I really do think it's an industry that you need to, in some way, find an outlet. And of course, it shouldn't be through smoking or drinking. But and that's also why I advise any dancer that is in company life, they have their hobbies. They keep hold of friends outside of the ballet world where they can have normal conversations with. And if you don't have any hobbies, start a hobby. Try to ask your parents who you were before you were 3 years old. Did you like to be outdoors? Did you like to, play games? Did you speak a lot, or were you a quiet child? Find out who you were before society started to have influences on you and push you in a certain direction. Because, yeah, the ballet world is certainly something that somebody puts us into, and we kind of just go along with it because of the training, and we don't, as kids, take the time or have the ability to think of anything else, right? But yeah, that everybody has an eating disorder, that's also one that really often surprises me, because I think if they actually see the power and the strength that's needed for dancers to function and do these 3-hour performances, you see the spraying off from the male dancer and also from the female dancer. Yeah, like you can't do this job without taking care of yourself.
By spray, you mean sweat.
Yeah, by spray, you mean sweat. And if you don't take care of yourself, it will show up. Eventually, it will show up, whether it's through injury, whether it's through burnout. Yeah, it will show up. It will show up also in your relationships. If you're overly tired, you'll be more reactive and frustrated. And yeah.
You already gave great advice for dancers. If you could distill your journey so far into one life lesson that is applicable to not just dancers, but everyone who's listening right now, what would that be?
My advice for everybody would be find a way to use your body in some way, in some form. For me to have used my body through my whole career, through, the art form of dance, makes it so much easier for me to connect with people and communicate with people. And I'm not saying that everybody has to go out and take dance classes, certainly not ballet classes, please don't. But it can be in the form of, I don't know, a martial art. It can be, but a martial art is also, or many martial arts are also some form of dance and discipline and respect and, a respect for other people's space and body awareness. Or it could be, even on a tennis court, there's still this respect of distance, right? And you're sort of dancing with each other. So find a way to use your body, because I know that it translates through everything I do. Even in the supermarket, when I go shopping with the trolley and I'm going around the aisles, and how I take the turns and how I slide to the next item of food that I need, like dance turns up, or how I use my body turns up in everything that I do. And I think it also communicates to us when we feel good, when we feel bad, if we feel anxious. And it's funny because as a dancer, I thought I was really connected with my body. But it was only later when I would feel certain tension in a certain place that wasn't related to workout or to ballet, or to muscle use, that I could actually start to listen to my body differently and understand when it was telling me that something wasn't matching up in a certain relationship or in a friendship or with my boss. Yeah.
Alex, thank you so, so much for taking the time to be here, to share your insights, your story. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing.